Good evening. Welcome to Firefighting Today, the weekly roundtable show where the panel discusses all sorts of topics fire service related. This week we're going to be talking about the ISO. What is the Insurance Service Office and what does it mean? If you are with us and you're watching us live on YouTube, if you have questions, if you want to have an interaction, if you type a YouTube comment, we should be able to bring your comment right into the screen and be able to involve you in the discussion. So let's first and foremost, let's introduce the panel, and then we'll get started with our presentation. So I am Peter Lamb. I am the author of PeteLamb.com. I am the host of the Firefighter Training Podcast. Adam, say hello.
Good evening. Adam Ganaway, volunteer with the Kellogg Fire Department right here in Kellogg, Iowa.
Perfect. Thanks, Adam. Charlie, say hello.
Good evening. Charlie Hall, Deputy Chief of Operations and Training for the TF Green Airport here in Providence, Rhode Island.
Thanks, Charlie. Frank, say hello.
Frank Blackley, Wilmington, North Carolina Fire Department, Assistant Chief of Admin Services.
Thanks, Frank. Greg, say hello.
Good evening, everybody. Greg Howard. I'm the Deputy Fire Chief for the Dashwood Volunteer Fire Department.
Thanks, Greg. Chief Ling, say hello.
Good evening, everybody. Rob Fling, I'm the Chief of Department of the Dix Hills Fire Department on Long Island, also the Chief of Training, and the founder and president of FacePeaceOn.com.
Thanks. Appreciate you being here, Rob. And our actual guest, our host for this evening, or whatever that gets him, I don't know. Chief Whitley, say hello.
Yes, I go. Hi, Warren Whitley, retired Assistant Chief from Prince William County, Virginia. And my disclaimer tonight is I am not an expert on ISO. I'm facilitating the discussion.
All right, good. No, that's good. We're trying to get sharing the love here on the panel, trying to pass stuff around. So we're going to have people doing other pieces. So first and foremost, I'm just going to toss this over to Warren. We're going to go through some slides. And again, if you are watching us live on YouTube, feel free to throw a comment so that we can, a respectful comment, and throw something in. And if you've got a question, we'll try to answer it. We got a bit of expertise on the panel here tonight. So, Warren, go ahead, take it away. You might be muted.
No, I'm not.
You are not, and you're going to bring up a screen share, right?
Yes.
All right, perfect.
Good, I can still hear you. Because I was going, how am I going to know when to stop talking?
I will make some sort of gesture in the window, in the small window.
Oh, I won't see you, I don't think. I guess I can't if I minimize my screen thing. Can you still see the screen?
I cannot see the slide anymore.
All right, well, I got to leave it up. I can't see you.
All right, that's all right.
Well, all right, so the question for tonight is ISO, is it still relevant? And part of the discussion is going to speak to that particular question, and if it is relevant, who is it relevant to?
And so you need to share again, Warren.
Did it go away? All right, hold on. It's too much like, I got to know what, like Joe knows what he's doing.
Let's not let that get out. All right, you're on slide 2, so perfect.
That doesn't make number 3 for him, does it?
No.
Doesn't count if it's the panel. All right, so what is the ISO? It's the Insurance Services Office, and this entity, because it's kind of hard to describe exactly, it's certainly private sector. So overall, they evaluate community fire protection capabilities, and then they assign a risk. So everybody's heard of, hey, I got an ISO rating of 6, or if you're trying to think, one of those large California cities is a 1, San Francisco, I think, off the top of my head. And they're pretty proud of that. So what do those ratings do? Well, they're supposed to help determine fire insurance rates based on those capabilities of the department. So they have a whole criteria they use to grade, and we'll get into that in just a few minutes. Now, one interesting thing I did find doing some research is even though this helps fire insurance rates based on the department capabilities, Some insurance companies don't even use ISO data. They just set your rates based on what they feel they should be. And they probably use some comparative data for the localities. And alternatively, some use it for commercial rates and not for homeowner rates. So there's kind of it's not universal in the states at all. And the other thing that Pete sent me a little article on for Greg's benefit, since we do have our Canadian brethren listening in and on the panel, their system is called the Dwelling Protection Grade System. Hopefully Greg can speak to that just a little bit. The big thing we want to know is, what does ISO evaluate when they come visit you? Fire alarms and communication system is actually a pretty big component. How are alarm and telephone requests for assistance processed? And by the alarm requests, we're talking private and fire alarm systems that go to a central monitoring station. You know, how do they get relayed? How are they handled? What priority? Things like that. What type of facility is the communications section in? Their power supply, do they have redundancy? Do they have redundancy if telephone lines go out? Radio, all those communication devices are evaluated for their robustness. And how does it operate overall? And a lot of that they'll look at, is it a single point dispatch, or is it, you know, a county-wide dispatch for, you know, more than one department, things along those lines. Then they're going to look at the fire department proper. What kind of staffing do they have? Response, career, volunteer, paid on call. You know, do they have crews on duty at the firehouse? Is it home response? All those sorts of details. What type of apparatus? Does it meet NFPA standards? Have they had the latest testing on the apparatus based on those NFPA standards? And an important cog is training, especially ongoing training, as well as the certification levels of the personnel that will respond. And the third big component is water supply. And that's where we get into, like, where I live now has a split rating of, I believe it's 6 and 9. So the rural parts of the area are 9, which is the lowest rating, and 6 is the bottom of the middle of the road for ratings. But for water supply, they're looking at pumping apparatus, how many, what are the capacities, were they tested, what is the required fire flow, and I believe they're looking at the required max fire flow for the jurisdiction based on the largest hazard. Do they have a hydrant system, and do they have periodic testing for the NFPA standards? And also, I forget the name of it, there is a public water supply standard that somebody else publishes. And the water supply grid, especially for the municipal type system. If it's rural water based, how do they do those supply operations? Do they practice them? What flow rate can they sustain routinely? You know, that is based on the sources they have, what sort of shuttle they can set up, the number of apparatus available for shuttles, things like that. So this all becomes an overall classification based on those big 3 areas. So one of the big questions we need to toss around tonight, is this a sound methodology? And there's a lot of historical things about how they have come up with it. And I could be wrong. The last time I talked to an ISO guy, a lot of the things that they look at originated in the 1950s, early 60s. I'm not positive, so don't quote me on this, but I think Rand Corporation had some part of helping them develop the methodologies, especially for station response areas. Pete, do you want to discuss this part now and then go on to the why do we care part?
Sure. Yeah. Let's talk about that. So a couple things. Frank threw in a comment. The water supply system you were talking about is, and Frank, I don't know if I got it right. Is it the American Water Works Association? Is that right?
That sounds right.
Yeah, okay, that's the municipal water system. So just to be clear for folks that may or may not have, if you're not a chief officer or if you've never dealt with this, so ISO actually sends a person to your fire department and inspects all of those things, and they'll spend a couple of days. They'll check equipment. They're pulling training records. They're looking for numbers of hours of training records. All of that stuff is done. And then when Warren was talking about the largest water supply, I've had experience where they will pick 3 or 4 large target hazards. In the Northeast, the big mill building or the big wood frame building or something, some large target hazard, and they'll be able to do that, and they'll get the maximum fire flow and determine 2 things. Do you have the apparatus and manpower to get that flow? And will the water system support that? So those are the kinds of things that happen. So Frank, you've just had a recent inspection. Do you want to talk a little bit about the recent inspection and what happened? Just shed some light for someone who may not be familiar.
It's the first time that we have been graded by ISO in many, many years. Prior to them coming in, we were inspected by the North Carolina Office of State Fire Marshal. They do all cities less than 100,000 or jurisdictions less than 100,000 in population. Well, since the last census we've gone, so they came in, and their goal now is to come back about every 4 years. And part of this stems from the fire in Class 1, and that it's drew their attention, and they went back, and I'm not sure exactly where they. A lot of the information we sent ahead of time, so when he actually came in, I mean, really 4 or 5 hours with them, because much of it is GIS based now, where you can send the information into them and they plug it into their information systems. So one of the things they did do, like for training, we sent him a list of our firefighters, and he chose which ones that he wanted to see, so we had to randomly pull those, so it wasn't like we could pick and choose who we sent it to. And those are some things like that. One thing we also learned is, with hydrant inspections now, it's only one. You get full credit if you're doing them at least every year. And prior to this new standard, it was once every 6 months. So that's a pretty big change, at least from our perspective. Also, if you can prove that your water system has a hydraulic model and it is accurate, then you don't have to do any flow testing on hydrants. And that kind of gigged us a little bit, because we don't typically test the hydrants or flow test all the hydrants every year. I mean, we just don't have the staff to do that. So we did come out with a Class 2, a rating 85 point something, I can't remember what it is, 85.38. And what kept us basically from 1 is, once again, is staffing. I mean, if we'd have to hire about 15 people to be able to do that. We also found out that when we were running a couple quints, and when you run quints, they are counted as an engine and also a truck for personnel, which actually did not help us. It actually hurt us. Yeah. So, and because we did very well with water, and we didn't do as well with staffing, what basically happens is that they put in what's called a divergent factor. And basically what happens is they're taking that 50 points you get for staff or the fire department, and then 40 points for. So if for some high end of water and maybe the low end of staffing, they can actually deduct points. So that's something you have to be aware of.
Yeah. Couple of points that came up there. So if you are a very small rural department, like whatever, I think it's 15,000 or maybe less than 25,000, you won't see ISO for 15 years. It's possible you will not get a rating for some 15 years or then some. And I could be wrong about that. It could actually be longer. Charlie and I'll throw this to Charlie for a question, because we both worked in a system that was unusual in that it was a quasi-municipal water system. and quite frankly, we couldn't even touch the hydrants. They didn't want us to use them when there were fires. So never mind go out and test them, inspect them, or maintain them. Charlie, did you suffer that with the water system in question? We will leave the name out of it.
Oh, absolutely. Honestly, we had no purview at all with the hydrant system. The testing was taken care of by the water authority. I paid a rental fee of $378 per hydrant per year. My hydrant budget was somewhere between $350,000 to $375,000 to rent the hydrant, whether or not I used it. And the only time we really got to use it is during training purpose. For training purposes or for actual jobs. We didn't touch them other than that. Never tested them. We went on our own just so we know certain areas, what we could expect for a fire flow, because even that information was very difficult to get from the water authority. They hold it, as you know, Chief. They held those cards very close to the vest.
Yeah, there's no question. So the reason I bring that up is both Charlie and I worked in a similar area, mutual aid area. The point is that ISO is rating your fire department on this third-party service, right? So if they don't do their job, that affects your fire insurance rating per se, to see where that is. Warren, do you have the rating numbers in front of you? So it's kind of like 1 to 10, 10 being no fire department. Do you have anything that explains it? I don't want to put you on the spot. If you don't, you don't, but you don't.
No, other than 10's the bottom, 9 if you have a pulse, and then 1 is the other end, where you have everything they want and probably have 1 station every square mile.
Right, right. And the other deal is that in the country, if we think about the total number of fire departments, and again, much like Warren, I am not the expert, but I'm going to throw out a number. It seems to me that there are about, Frank, you might know this, there are about 60 Class 1 fire departments in the country, in the United States. So it is a pretty rare occasion that you have a Class 1. That's a pretty big deal. Yeah, go ahead.
North Providence just got Class 1. I don't know if you're aware of that.
I am aware of that. Yeah, the city of Providence is the major capital city in Rhode Island, and an adjacent city, different municipality, is now a Class 1 because they worked at it. There are okay. Thank you, Frank. There are 750 Class 2s. So good information. So the point is. Frank, you are there. Frank's filling in for Ethan tonight. I love it. Frank says there are 2,410 Class 3 departments. And do you have the rest of the stuff? Can you go? Just take us to like 6, I guess. You do have all the numbers. So let's go. Let's just go to like 5s and 6s if you can, Frank.
Okay. Class 2, there's 750. Class 3, there's 2,410. Class 4, 5,216. Class 5, 8,722. And Class 6, 9,026.
And then go right over to 9.
And just FYI, 12,437 and 1,734 Class 10.
Okay, so 12,000 Class 9 departments, right? So I think this is probably the segue where we get into what Warren is saying is okay, we know it matters, and I know that fire chiefs for years used ISO, and Warren, I'll ask you to comment about this after I throw it out there, but for years, fire chiefs thought that ISO was the magic bullet. I'll say ISO and I'll get more resources and I'll get more stuff because ISO says. So they paid an awful lot of attention to it. They would follow the equipment list in detail and so on and so forth. Now, as Frank said, much of it now is computerized and electronically able to be submitted and so on and so forth. The other thing that ISO talks about, Warren, that we didn't talk about was station locations. You kind of referenced it there with 1 station every mile or something, but without there are certain distances required for engine companies and ladder companies. So you want to talk about station location, and then let's segue into does this really matter, Warren?
Well, they do look at station locations, but more importantly now with GIS is they're looking at response times. So depending on your highway infrastructure, the old models from your old ICMA book, for instance, don't really hold as they're not held as high a regard these days, because with GIS, better roads, things like that, you can actually increase your, in some cases, increase your station's spacing and still get the required staff on scene within their time frames. The other thing to consider with that is what type of staffing are you accumulating within, say, the first 8 minutes. You know, that becomes a factor. You know, your first alarm needs to be on site and effective, the effective firefighting force in a certain amount of time.
Right, right.
The part of it is, and you know, just to throw this tidbit out there for anybody in a planning section writ large, like Frank in Wilmington for admin, if you're looking at station locations, there's several models out there you can look at that will run your GIS data and tell you where's the best location for your next station. So that kind of plays into, well, how do you get the land if you need it with proffers, things like that. So there's a whole lot of things you need to look at besides ISO requirements to figure out where those stations are so you get the best bang for your buck. And for the really planning type folks, you don't want to look next year, you want to be looking 20, 25 years down the road as population increases, proposed highway systems, things like that. So it does, in that respect, you need to pay attention to it. And when you have things like consolidations, you know, in the old days you might have, New Jersey's probably a good example where so many little townships each have their own fire department that are might be 200 feet from the line because of the taxes, and then you have, you know, you go 3 more blocks and there's the firehouse for the next jurisdiction. When they consolidate, it may be a good thing for ISO or it may be a real headache for you, because they might all be clustered and not spread out where they need to be to cover the new jurisdiction. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that does make sense, and we actually lived that. We had some independent person do a study, which I will reserve comment on, but we had some independent politician type do a study here in Rhode Island. We have 39 cities and towns in the state of Rhode Island, smallest state in the union, and we have 81 fire departments. So that's exactly what Warren was just alluding to. That's exactly the situation. Boundaries are sort of made up boundaries. They go back to the 1800s in some cases. So that was the type of thing. Rob's talking about having 110 departments in one county there on Long Island. So again, those situations that Warren alluded to are very, very common situations. Go ahead, Warren.
Well, one thing that kind of speaks to all that is also ISO is going to look for your alarm assignments. How does mutual aid work? Especially in those clusters where you got all these little jurisdictions, they may or may not like each other, and their mutual aid agreements may be pretty bizarre, which may affect your ISO rating, because you might be skipping the 2 closest companies because of political reasons and having your next help come in from farther away. So that affects response times and first alarm assignment gathering personnel.
Absolutely, and so, you know, not to play semantics, but not only mutual aid, but automatic aid, because you can get, if somebody responds automatically, you can begin to count them as apparatus and manpower on the first alarm rather than being special called. So that also helps. Any questions from the viewers? If anybody's watching live, if you do have questions or comments, feel free to throw those in. So, all right, Warren. So I'll be the skunk at the lawn party. Who cares? Who cares about ISO? I'm a fire chief. Do I? You know, Rob's here. Does he care? What's the point?
Well, Hold on, let me change my slide. Well, that's a good question, Pete. Glad you let in with that. It's not a setup, folks. It's spontaneous from Pete. Really, the big overarching question to this whole conversation this evening is who benefits from an ISO rating? You know, from my time as an admin chief, support services, you know, we cared about ISO for the political reason of trying to use that as a justification for needed staffing. We knew we needed it, but, you know, this gave us ammunition. It wasn't just the chief saying we needed it because, well, we have these ISO requirements if we want to improve the rating. So that was, you know, kind of some leverage there. But there's other ways to get that leverage now, because really, if you think about it, in the budget frontier for justifications, you could also look at accreditation as a piece of leverage. You know, what do you need to, if you can't be accredited, how do you address that gap? You know, is it staffing, apparatus, stations, or whatever? So, you know, so the questions are, does the fire department benefit? On one hand, yes, it can. On the other, you may be trying to reach a pinnacle that's just a bridge too far, or a rating that's a bridge too far for one, the area you're in, the economic viability of being able to get more staffing or apparatus or newer apparatus, whatever the case is. My big question, though, is how do the citizens actually benefit from this? What kind of impact is it actually for me, Harry homeowner, on my fire insurance? You know, is it worth my taxes going up X number of dollars for me to save 5 or 10 on my annual insurance rating? You know, does the insurance industry benefit from it? And I don't know. You know, as I said in one of the first slides, some insurance companies aren't even going by the ISO rating anyway. They're using their own methodology to set rates, whether it's comparative to other companies or comparisons to different communities. What are the other hazards in the community? Things like that. I've already mentioned, is this the only way to evaluate a fire service? And no, it's not. So, and Frank's already said that North Carolina either still does or has in the past done their own evaluation of fire departments.
Right, and actually Frank has a comment that I think is relative. Frank, what has been your experience? Do you have data that indicates that a Class 2 rating may or may not, or may make little difference? What was the fact you just tossed out there?
It's very, yeah, I mean, for residential, to go to a Class 1 from a Class 2 is going to cost them money because taxes are going to have to go up to pay for the service. Unless the city's growing and they're able to do that. But for the most part, even for commercial, it's very difficult to quantify because there's so many factors that play into insurance. An example is if you're in a strip shopping center and you're a tenant and you get your insurance, it's going to probably include fire, but it's also probably going to include theft and all the other things that go with it, liability, and you can't even tell how much it's going to change. So it's very difficult. I mean, I've tried to figure it out, and it may, but is it going to save everybody money by us going to a Class 1? As our chief told City Council, he said he would rather go and hire people because of safety on the fire ground versus trying to get a Class 1. If we get a Class 1 out of it, that's fine and dandy, that's great, but that would not be the reason for us to try and hire people because of ISO.
Right, absolutely. So, yeah, and that has been my experience. We've had people talk about it. We had industrial parks and those kinds of things, and their effect on insurance I think and this is just Pete's opinion, I think that the real difference is on the back end of this. If you ever, you're a 9, and you have a rural water supply system and you establish a system that can move a couple thousand gallons of water and sustain it, I think it's either 1 hour or 2 hours, then you really get some payoff. Then there is some difference, I think, in the citizens' homeowners rating. But as Frank said, what ISO is looking for is lots of equipment, lots of staffing, and an established water system, you know, that costs money to the city and town. So the real trade-off is, you know, I pay money to save money. Is there a return on investment? Rob, you've been kind of quiet. What are you thinking about this discussion? And A, have you had an ISO rating yet in your department? You're muted.
Sorry, I was muted. Currently, I have an ISO rating of 3. We are working our way down to 2. Apparently, our stumbling block is our 911 system. Our 911 system goes to county. County then forwards that call to our in-house dispatcher. There's something with the way the county is dispatching calls, whether they partake in the ISO way of doing things or whatever the reason is, I don't know. But that is what our stumbling block is at the moment. If we went back to self-dispatching, which we did for a while, we weren't part of necessarily the 911 system. We went with a direct hotline right to our dispatcher. We'd probably be at 2. I don't have much of a problem from a chief standpoint with ISO. It is what it is. I can't help but think that the first thing that comes to my mind is business is business. It's just like anything else. You know, this is going to do this, that's going to do that. Me as a chief of a volunteer department in a county on Long Island, I have to play the game. I'm not going to change it. Like I said, it is what it is. I'll do the best I can. If it happens to work out for our citizens, more power to us, I guess. But, you know, we're 26 square miles. We have 3 stations. We're not adding another station. We seem to be doing okay the way we are right now. If I can get it to a 2, it's probably about as high as I'm going to go.
Right. So you're going to run the fire department, and if that has an impact on the ISO rating, good news. Yeah, but you're not going to run the fire department based upon the ISO rating.
Correct.
Right. We got a question from Christine. Thanks for being here, Christine. So let's see if we can frame this up, and I'm going to toss this to Warren. So if small suburban departments were to consolidate and regionalize, especially since it eliminates the need to duplicate equipment, what would be different as far as evaluating for an ISO rating? Well, obviously we can't measure that exactly, Christine. I'll take a crack, and then I'll throw it over to Warren. And that is this. One of the things ISO does say is if you have a pumper, you need to have a reserve pumper. If you have an aerial, you need to have a reserve aerial, and those kinds of things still take place, and they establish credit for what type of equipment you have. So the first thing that happens is a community says, I want to regionalize, and they begin to sell off equipment. So you do need some equipment. You don't need the complete duplication. What do you think would happen, Warren? Do you have any thoughts in how to respond to this? I mean, we don't know any specifics, but you do save money on some duplication, but what would be the trade-offs, Warren?
I think you're right. You can sell off some. My old rule of thumb was for every 3 pumpers, you need 1 reserve. About the same for ladder trucks, depending on their history of maintenance required and their age. But when you do, they're still going to look at, does this consolidation, how does it affect your first alarm response with response times, staffing? They're going to still, now they've taken their view from one single department out to encompass this whole new regionalization if it becomes, you know, one entity. So I think really, could it work to your advantage? I guess the answer is it depends. You know, what apparatus is available, what the station locations are, and how does it improve your staffing? Does it remain level? In some cases, do you lose members because they don't want to be part of a new larger organization? They like their, you know, their single house or whatever it was. So there's no way to really accurately answer that.
Yeah, no, there are a ton of variables to that, Christine, but thank you for that question. Certainly, I appreciate you being there. Charlie, well, how did you manage it in a previous life? Certainly, the airport has a different set of rules, but in a previous life, How did you manage it? Did you strive toward it? Was it a planning document for you, or did you just operate and let the chips fall where they may?
It wasn't even a consideration as far as the development of short and long-term plans for the department. It did come up in conversation, and it was discussed as to what we needed to do in order to improve our rating, and money, particularly in the area of staffing, money being what it was and still is, made it virtually extremely difficult for us to go up a classification. We were a solid, if there was a such thing as a 4.5, but I'd say we were a 5. There was never an ISO inspection during my tenure as chief. One had been done previously, and I believe the classification was a 5. The staffing is what hurt us. Station locations were good, water supply was good, equipment was good, but dispatch with the single-person dispatch and this dispatch center being inside the headquarters station, and also the limited staffing is what hurt us. But as far as long and short-term planning, ISO proper, no, not a consideration as far as long and short-term planning, but always in the back.
Right, right. And I would say to somebody that is watching tonight, you know, and I'd toss this back to Frank to comment on this. Record keeping is a big deal. If you don't think it is, if you hate record keeping, if you hate pushing paper, when you start talking about maintenance records and training records, that is the real deal. Frank, do you want to comment about how important that can be?
It's extremely important. We did pretty good with the training section, but one of the examples was for our guys actually going to the training center, and if it's not documented, that's where they went. You know, our software package, you can put location where you go, and sometimes they wouldn't fill that out, so it can hurt. And, you know, that's one of the things that we look at now as a tool to make sure that we're doing it correctly, doing a quality and assurance checking on the training records. That's just one of the little things there. You know, your incident reporting, your records for inspections, pre-incident planning. Do you have your, you know, there's additional points now, 5.5 points for community risk reduction. Do you have people that are fire and life safety educators that have certifications? Do you teach, I'm trying to think of something else that came up. Do you teach your company officers any type of fire investigation training? We're going to be doing that. All the stuff that came back that we know that we can fix easily, we're putting in our business plan. So that's something that we will be following up on a consistent basis. In other words, it's not just going to be something that they told us to do. We're actually going to fix those issues. So maybe the next time they come in, we can get 87 versus the 85 points.
Right, right. And when Frank's talking about the point system, understand that they actually work in fractions of a point. It's 0.45, it's 0.37, so they're actual fractions. So, Frank, how would you characterize ISO in your world? Is it a planning document? I mean, obviously you've just had a rating, so you're going to work on the improvement issues, but prior to the rating, how important was that in your discussion?
It didn't come up too often. We were more focused on accreditation. You know, there's a lot of work. You know, I made a comment, you know, on the chat board that luckily we had just been through accreditation, and it helped us a lot to make sure that we had the data available for them. It wasn't hard to go and find, so that helped us tremendously.
Right, right. So, Warren, where do you want to take this discussion? And we actually didn't hear your opinion. You've been facilitating for us, but let's get the world according to Warren. Let's get your version of it.
All right. Well, I think it has some value, but I've been the same place Frank has been. If I were to compare what ISO looks at and then what accreditation that process looks at and gives me, from my perspective of looking to the future, planning to address gaps, I think the accreditation process is much more useful to me. ISO, again, it's really hard to determine where the bang for the buck is. You know, my return on my investment for going from a 5 to a 3, from a 3 to a 1, etc. You know, you're actually spending a lot of money. What are the citizens getting back from it? Granted, they're getting an improved service, but is the improvement enough to offset the tax increase they get versus the insurance decrease they may or may not see?
Right, right, no question. And I joke often. My uncle was on the job for many, many years, and when I first got involved on the job, his comment to me was, "Listen, it doesn't matter what you do. You're working for the insurance company. You're just hedging the insurance company's bet, because if you save something, they don't have to pay a bigger claim." You know, and you take it all the way, you know, Ben Franklin, right? The early fire department in America, not the first, but early fire department in America. It coincidentally started the first insurance company in America too. So you now that really, you know, gee, I wonder what that had in common. So there certainly are some changes there. For myself, we were aware of it. We used it as maybe a target now and again. But it certainly was not a planning document. And I interacted with them in many cases, asking what potential savings might be, asking what happened. We went through budget cuts. We reduced on-duty staffing by 30%. So I assumed that our rating would change. ISO said no change. So again, I lost faith in the value of it when I started asking specific questions. You know, it is important to be able to do that. So yeah, so you know, Rob's talking about the you know, the Class 1 departments. I'll go over to Rob and talk about that. You know, Class 1 is a big deal, and let me just see if I can say this politely. We have some Class 1s here in Rhode Island, in Mass. When I was in Mass, we had some Class 1s. Does it relate? I mean, I'm just going to throw this out there as an overhead question. Does Class 1 actually show in performance? You're right. Almost every fire department. I think LA City has it on the side of the trucks. Rob, you were saying probably Las Vegas.
I noticed it in Las Vegas.
Yeah, and people put it on their patches and so forth. So again, it's something. Listen, if you're one of 60 fire departments or whatever the number is, some small number, something to be proud of, absolutely. As long as your performance, you know, you're not a paper tiger. You know what I mean? You got all the paperwork in order and everything's there, and you got a hydrant on every corner. You got the staffing you need. Is that related to a performance standard? I'm not sure it is, but that's just me. So let's begin to summarize this. Adam, you're in a small place. Was there ever any discussion about ISO stuff before tonight? How exposed were you to that, and you know, what do you think it means in your world?
No, I'm really not familiar with the ISO. When I think talked about a little bit about last week about the show, I just happened to hit my neighbor up that was a past chief talking a little bit about ISO. So this is all new to me, so I'm not familiar with it. So a lot of great information from everybody here on the panel.
All right, appreciate it. Charlie, what do you got to say about ISO for the viewers as we begin to summarize? Anything? You might be muted, Charlie.
I'll say the comment that was made in the chat room by Rob Fling is spot on. I think the accreditation that Frank spoke about is much more important. I think it's more meaningful as far as the progress of the department, what the department's doing moving forward, rather than just getting to, again, as Rob said, painting on the side of the apparatus. And the average citizen probably doesn't have any idea if they can realize, or if they do realize a savings, they're not going to be aware it's because of the fire department having a Class 1 rating. So, choice between, you know, if I had to choose between the two, I would take the accreditation anytime.
All right, good stuff. Frank, what's your summary statement about ISO? How important? What do you want the viewer to take away as we begin to wind down?
I still think it's something you're going to need to pay attention to, specifically if you're a rural department and you're able to provide water, and not with just your department, with mutual aid or automatic aid companies. I think it's obviously very beneficial to your homeowners, especially if you go from a 9 to an 8 to a 7 to a 6, and basically to a 5, and then basically at that point it's not as advantageous to residential, but even for commercial it's going to be a little bit, but it really depends on, I guess, where you are in the process.
Yeah, I think that's correct. Rob, what are you thinking? Any comments as we begin to summarize?
Not really. Like I said before, it's business is business. No matter what we do, we're really not going to change it. It's just one of those things that we got to live with. We try to do the best we can, and with what we have, and that's what it is. At the end of the day, like I said before, most citizens probably have never heard of ISO, and even more probably have absolutely no idea what it means.
Right.
But, that being said, it brings up a good point. They'll see their tax bill and notice that their fire tax went up immediately, probably long before they even know the ISO impact on what it is on their insurance bill.
Yeah, I agree. When you're talking about taxation, when you're talking about taxpayers, that is going to be in the forefront. I couldn't agree more with you there, Rob. I think that's exactly right. And Warren, I'm going to give it back to you. Is that the last slide, or you got one more? Let's just summarize it as we take us out, Warren.
No, that was the last slide. I think, it is a benchmark. So, ISO does have some use to us. I would say it probably has more use for the insurance side of the world than it does for us. Again, I'll agree with Charlie. I'll take accreditation over ISO any day, because that gives me a more comprehensive and definitive roadmap to address gaps.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's true. So if you are a chief and you're watching this, you have to be aware of ISO. You have to determine how much money you're going to spend to accomplish it. There are simple things and simple tasks, attention to detail. Very small departments, like the Adams and the small rural departments out there, record keeping is a big deal. Document everything. That would be something that's easy to do. It's not a high cost. Try to get that information done. Try to keep track of where your responses are. Figure out where you're servicing. What is your area? What is response times? All of those things. Those things are something that you need to pay attention to. And as Warren's pointing out, documentation is really cheap. Somebody's got to do it, but it's something you can actually make a tangible difference for. So if you're a regular firefighter, pay attention to it, do a little studying about it, do a little research on it. If you're a chief officer or a fire officer, as Warren said, good word, it is a benchmark. It is one of the benchmarks you can use to look at things. So I think that's good. We'll just kind of drag our feet for a second. If there are any other viewer comments, we'll just hold for a second. And just a quick announcement that there probably will not be a show next week. We've got some scheduling stuff going on, so there probably will not be a show next week, and we'll take that from there. All right. That being said, let's go, and we will see you all in a future broadcast. Again, just look for the notices, look for the emails. There will be no show next week. All right. Take care.